What's up? Hey YouTube, E30 Source here today with another video. I will be replacing spark plugs as well as the rocker shaft plugs on my BMW E30. I also forgot to mention that I will be replacing the head bolts in my car due to the fact that the original hex head style head bolts would snap and break under pressure, and over time they would work themselves out of the block and eventually cause catastrophic engine failure. So if you have the original hex head kind, I would highly recommend replacing them. Okay, so some of the tools you might need. This is a definite. You're going to need a E14 star socket, like this one shown here. This is a head bolt, and that's the socket for it, an E14. These are really good to have around because BMWs use a lot of these star socket, and you'll find them throughout, taking down certain parts on the E30 or even newer generation BMW models. The next set you're going to need is a pick set. I would recommend the 90-degree one here, or you can use a hook one, but either of the two, they work great, and I got this for free with that coupon. The next tool you're going to need is a breaker bar. You're going to need a pretty big sized one. This is the 25-inch, and I think it was like $13 from Harbor Freight also. And it's just a good tool to have, either taking off wheels, putting on wheels, anything of the nature, big bolts and what have you. The next thing you're going to need is your head bolts. These are sold in a set by Victor Reigns, and these are the later model star type ones as opposed to the hex ones that are in the car right now. The next thing I'm going to be replacing is the spark plugs, and by what I hear, the Bosch Super Plus are the best kind to use, not the Platinums. People get that wrong a lot, where they put the Platinums inside, and supposedly these are the best kind. I'm hoping that I see a mile per gallon increase, and so I can get a little bit more economy out of the fuel, but I don't know. I got to see how it changes the gas mileage. Right now I have Bosch Platinums in there, and by what I hear, they're not very good for the E30 M20B25 engine. The last and final tool you're going to need is a 10mm. I'd recommend the quarter drive ratchet with a short extension and a deep 10mm socket. This tool especially you're going to need for taking off the valve cover, and it's just a great tool to have. Again, you should have a basic socket set when you do any work on the E30, but this is definitely a setup that I would use for taking off the valve cover. And last but not least, the rocker shaft plugs at the end. These are the little half moons. Some people call them shields. They go by a ton of different names, but these are what's leaking on my car right now. So I'll show you how to replace these as well. Other than that, let's get started. This procedure can be done outside. However, I'd recommend doing it inside a garage or a well-lit area so you can see exactly what you're doing. Start by opening up the hood. Now, if you do any other bigger job on an E30, such as a timing belt or radiator cooling, whatever it may be, if you want to give yourself a little bit extra room, you would actually want to go to this point right here. It's the hinge, and it attaches itself to the strut on the hood itself. So it's very simple. All it is a small clip that you can just pop right out, and then you can pop the pin out on the other side, and it'll give you about an extra foot of clearance. Just be careful though when you let go of it in the front that it's not resting too hard up against the grill, because you will end up either snapping it because the plastic is very brittle and thin, and you don't want to do that. So just be careful, either tie it down with a bungee cord or put a rag over the grill. Just be careful not to break the grill. To do the head bolts, you want to start by taking off the valve cover. This will also expose the rocker shaft plugs, and this is the time to also do a valve cover gasket if need be. To remove the valve cover, you want to loosen the 8 10mm hex head nuts that are around the valve cover, pointed out here. Then remove the 4 bolts that hold the valve cover onto the intake manifold. The 2 bolt to the valve cover, and where those 2 little holes are that I marked out on this photo, those are where the top part of the bracket were to be if it was mounted. Now loosen the 6mm hex head on the hose clamp holding on the PCV hose to the valve cover. Now lift the hose away from the valve cover
and you should be able to pull the valve cover right off the head of the engine. And if you're unsure if you have the old style head bolts, instead of having to pull off the whole valve cover, you can just look through the little oil fill cap right there, and you should be able to see what kind of head bolts you have. Here I show you the torque pattern in which I torqued the head bolts. Now that is not the correct way I just showed you there, the crisscross pattern. It's supposed to be from the center out, so those middle two right there, you know, they'd be 1, 2, and then you'd work your way out. I went from the out to the in, and I later found out that that is not the correct way to do it. I apologize, but it's supposed to be from the center out, not from the out to the center. And here's a photo of the correct torque pattern I found off the internet. I figured I'd share with you guys. Now for time's sake, I figured I'd just give you guys one of the head bolts that I did instead of doing all 14 in front of you guys. I started with the top right, which is not the correct way to do it. However, I've had no problems with the head or anything, the head gasket, so I figured I did fine. I started by removing the 17mm hex head old style head bolt with an impact gun to shorten down on time for me, and then I just slid it right out of the hole. Now, what you want to do is, it's actually really hot because I was just running the engine, but if you allow your engine to cool for a couple hours, you should be fine. Now what you need to do is you need to swap over the washer that is held on there. You can see there. You need that on the new style head bolt as well. The washer you don't have to replace, they're still good. The bolt, however, is obviously bad. Here I'm pointing out some differences between the newer style head bolt. You can see right there it's a little bit more reinforced as it gets up to the head of the bolt. And obviously it's a little bit longer as well in thread size. So that's always a good thing. So here's the washer. I slid it off, and it's also a good idea to just get a little rag and wipe it down, wipe off the oil on it or any soot or whatever may be on there, and wipe it off and then slide it onto the newer style head bolt. Then you can take your new head bolt and run it in by hand. Then you want to get out your torque wrench and set it to the initial 22 foot-pounds. You don't wait in between torques or anything like that. It's not you go around 22 to each one, then quarter, then another quarter. It's 22, a quarter turn or 90 degrees, and then another quarter turn or 90 degrees. You don't go in between torques or anything like that. It's one shot to one bolt, 22, 90, then another 90, and you're done. So here I set my initial torque to 22. I'm trying to get good placement because it's kind of a cheapy breaker bar by Harbor Freight, so I have a lot of flex in the head there, which is part of the reason why I returned the breaker bar after doing this job. But I'm trying to get a good placement, and once I do 90 degrees, and then I do another 90 degrees. Now for the back two head bolts right there, what you're going to have to do is remove the 10mm nuts that hold on the wire harness up there. The issue is it'll interfere and get in the way when you try to pull out the head bolts, and I probably should have done this while the valve cover was on top of the valves, so to prevent any dust or debris from falling in. However, I just did it this way and it worked fine. Alright, so now all the head bolts are done, and I don't have to worry about any of them snapping ever again. So here we go on to spark plugs. The spark plugs can be taken out with the 13/16 spark plug socket. They do make spark plug specific sockets, and I took out the Bosch Platinums that were in there. It's a really simple thing to do, however, it makes all the difference when it comes to a BMW engine. So the new spark plugs come with the little caps right there. You can see a little silver cap up there, and you're gonna have to remove that with some needle nose pliers. Just be careful not to squeeze too much, or else it'll be impossible to take it off later on. What I mean by that is having it screw off there, it gets really tight if you pinch it down too tight with needle nose. Once the cap is taken off the spark plug, it can be reinserted into the cylinder. And the torque on these are 22 foot-pounds. However, I really don't torque spark plugs. Just hand tight should be tight enough. But again, 22 foot-pounds if you want to be by the books. So for the rocker shaft plugs, what you want to do is pull up on the valve cover gasket. For some reason, I don't know why, mine gave me a lot of trouble coming up. But anyway, so I got it up off the valve cover, I'm sorry, the head of the engine. And once that it was up, I was able to pull it away from the engine. Now get out your little pick and you can stab one of the old rocker plugs and just pull it right up. For the new one, it slides right in, just like the old one did. However, if you look, the new one, since it isn't old and brittle, you can see that one is flat. That's the old one, and that one's the new one. And it's actually got a little bump to it, so when the valve cover gets torqued down, it expands out and fills the rocker shaft hole, you know, I guess what you could say, on the side of the head of the engine. Once all 4 rocker shaft plugs are put in, then you can slide the valve cover gasket back on, and then the valve cover. Once the valve cover is seated in properly, you can put on and finger tighten all the nuts and bolts that hold it on, and then you can tighten it down with the torque wrench. It's 132 inch-pounds. Again, that's 132 inch-pounds, not foot-pounds. Don't forget to tighten up the clamp on the PCV hose running to the valve cover. And the bracket that attaches from the intake manifold to the valve cover doesn't have a torque. Just make it, you know, tight enough with a 1/4 drive ratchet. And the most important part, the oil fill cap. And it's a good custom just to get a damp rag with maybe a little bit of cleaner on it and just wipe down all the oil and grease off the valve cover that you got on there. And I started it up and took it for a test drive. And I did see a slight increase in miles per gallon, about 1 to 2 miles per gallon, that is. And even though that may not seem like much, it does help out a lot in the long run. Thank you for watching E30 Source, and stay tuned for more E30 videos.